Hello, everyone. Welcome to our YouTube channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe and hit that bell button to turn on notifications. I'm Emma, your friendly host.
I'm Lily, Vanessa 2.0.
I'm Mia, resident sexologist.
And I'm Connor, the historian.
Today, we will be talking about the masterpiece Blackouts by Justin Torres. Now, this book has truly captivated us, and if I had to describe this book in 5 sentences or less, spoiler warning ahead, it would go something like this. The book follows two main characters, Juan, who is on his deathbed, and Nini, who comes to his side, as they share different stories from their life. Through these stories, you start understanding/sympathizing with them as Puerto Rican queer men in a world full of oppression. While talking to each other, Nini's attention falls on one of Juan's books called Sex Variants, whose main author was a woman named Jan Gay. We start to learn how Jan was a mother figure to Juan, and how her work as a queer theorist was stolen, manipulated, and changed. Through these characters' experiences, you realize that their whole life, in one way or another, was filled with blackouts. Now, let me say, it was so difficult to summarize this book in 5 sentences. I could go on and on about how this book uses storytelling in such a clever way to teach you about oppression. But you may be wondering, why blackouts? Well, the name signifies many different parts of the story. For example, Juan and Nini met at a mental hospital, and both of them had blackout episodes. You learn about Nini blacking out and causing a flood in his apartment, while Juan blacked out in a street as a child as a result of seizures. The title also refers to Jan Gay's work and how the story Sex Variants that Nini picks up is filled with blacked out pages in a sort of poetic way, leaving only a few words legible. However, this goes way deeper than just some book pages and coincidences. Through the story, you really start to learn the significance of mental and physical censorship. Now, how does this book relate to our class?
All right. Hey guys, I'm super excited to be here. And first, I'm gonna break down how blackouts fits within the conversations we've been having in Unit 3. And then I'm gonna explore how blackouts perpetuates some common LGBTQ tropes. All right, so let's talk about Jan Gay. Jan Gay was a lesbian and a sex researcher. She conducted hundreds of interviews with gay and lesbian individuals in an effort to destigmatize homosexuality. Her studies were foundational to the publication of the book Sex Variants. Now, despite her contribution, she received little credit, and her name was practically erased from the book. The research she intended to use to bring visibility to the queer community was ultimately manipulated into something that saw queer people through a eugenic lens and exploited the experiences of queer people. This outcome was obviously the opposite of Jan Gay's intentions. She pursued an opportunity that she thought promised visibility, but it turned out to be a trap. Okay, now let's move on to tropes. So, unfortunately, Blackouts does perpetuate the older man, younger boy relationship, and this is seen throughout the novel. Not only is there a huge age gap and unspoken romantic and sexual tension between our two main characters, Nini and Juan, Nini frequently retells notable moments from his sex life, almost always involving an older man paying him for sex work. Nini even recounts a time when he prostituted himself to a man that begged him to wear a diaper. However, a noteworthy difference in this trope is the fact that Nini is of age in almost all of the sexual encounters he describes. But nevertheless, there is an undeniable nod to this pederastic trope.
Thank you, Lily. So, what does this book tell you about visibility?
Yeah, so the novel explores and connects the idea that visibility is extremely important in media and just in real life. In the first quote, one of the characters confronts the other about holding a lit sign above his head and begging for sympathy. Um, begging for sympathy, but no matter how visible you make yourself, no matter how big your and bright your sign is, no one's ever going to understand and it's never going to be enough. This speaks to the idea that no matter how visible you make yourself in the mirror, you're invisible in the eyes of society. Um, the next quote talks about how noncompliance is bad behavior. In the novel and in society in general, homosexuality was considered bad behavior, which made them more visible and more nonconformist. Hence why homosexual stories and works were blacked out. To literally interpret the meaning of blackouts and censorship is to see that you cannot black out a human being. You can black out their words and their works, but you cannot black out their lived experiences. In this quote, he's talking about how he is scared to die before he finishes his novel of life. He is worried about what the ending will say, what will be erased, if his story will even be told, and what the verdict will be. What will they deem appropriate? This begs the question, will our stories be blacked out in death if there's no one to erase the ink?
Thank you. So what would you say is the historical significance of the book?
I'll be talking about how Blackouts relates to the historical significance and the time period when it was written. Um, Blackouts stories and narratives often set in the time period of sexology and mentions how it was used to manipulate queer research and to pathologize queer people. It drew significant inspiration from the real life of Janetta H. Foster, who was mentioned before, wrote several research papers about queer people as such as sex variants and sex variant women in literature. Queer researchers such as Foster needed respected senior white doctors of sexology to back their research in order to publish their findings. These doctors often manipulated these findings people like Foster brought to light, leading to further disinformation surrounding queer people. And now, why write Blackouts today? Well, Blackouts was only written a few years ago. It was released in 2023. And lots of sexology research has been identified as manipulated and fabricated in our time. And now that historians and authors such as Justin Torres realize this, people have started looking back on these past papers and narratives that sexologists were pushing out into our culture and realizing that a lot of the data and queer researchers that were writing them actually did have data that supported queer people and showed how these oppressive doctors of sexology were manipulating the data to further oppress queer people in our time. And additionally, some of the blackouts in these books are using the idea of reclaiming these ideas as they are creating poems out of these pages of research that often looked down on queer people overall. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you guys for all of your thoughts and your insights. Sadly, that is all the time we have for today. Thank you guys so much for watching, and look out for our next video on the Communist Manifesto.